Okay, so it's actually the differences here which make this so interesting and so cool to me, but let's lay out all the parallels first, and believe me, there are a ton of parallels here. Even once I started seeing how the stories were similar, I was shocked. Okay, so these stories are both about engineers who work with technology. Technology that's actually quite dangerous, proven to be dangerous, they know it's dangerous, they're warned it's dangerous, we're given warnings, actually the exact same warning.
Putting that kind of power into everyone's hands is dangerous.
You don't want this winding up in the wrong hands.
But because they're naive, they're not concerned with it. The inciting incident is an accident. It's something that happens that's not planned, it's not supposed to happen. This puts our hero in a devastating situation, a life-threatening situation. But he is urged urged to develop this technology with everything depending on it. And, by the way, he has a companion who saved his life, a strong, quiet, somewhat frail partner who will help him. And this partner, by the way, is also in a life-threatening situation and faces his impending death, all dependent on the efforts of our hero. But the technology works, and it's glorious. And, by the way, what is this technology? Simple. It's a super battery, it's super compact, it glows blue, and it's named after a shape that's, not exactly the shape that it actually is. I don't know, this is kind of confusing to me. Okay, but there's a problem. So there's a corrupt businessman who also wants this technology, and the tech ends up being stolen from our hero with the threat of
a new generation of weapons, with this at its heart.
So what can be done? It's not enough to simply shut down the economic side of things. Our hero needs to take matters into his own hands. This tech is too dangerous to fall into just anyone's hands, but if we limit its application to personal use, that should be enough. We need to take on everyone at once, shoot all the energy beams, and, by the way, by now, our hero has been forced to use the tech in violent fashion, and he finally is waking up to the horrors of war, the risks. The life of the character's companion, his partner, maybe lover, is there tension there? We see that life threatened, and it all depends on the tech. The ending of these arcs have a meeting with a corrupt businessman, and at that point they do diverge, but we still do get the irony at the end.
Ironic, Tony! Trying to rid the world of weapons! You gave it its best one ever! And now, I'm gonna kill you with it!
We get to see the conflict unfold between the moral and the amoral when it comes to science. So what do we have? Two stories about naive superstar inventors, outward celebrities, side note, both with romantic endeavors resulting from their status, but these are characters who actually spend all their time just kind of being nerds and doing science. Both characters have companions, maybe lovers, helping them out, and who they have to save, which depends on whether or not the tech is good enough. These are characters who both like to do things on their own and have to take matters into their own hands because the establishment is corrupt. These are also characters who, because of their intellectual talents, just have personal access to weaponry that's on a different level from the whole rest of the world. It's about sheltered intellectuals learning about the horrors of war. It's a story that questions the morality of technology. Okay, but the two stories still remain pretty different, and that difference stems from one main element here, character. Same story, lots of the exact same plot beats, but completely different characters. Let's compare. So I count about 7 major differences in personality. Jayce comes from nothing, or at least nothing by topsider standards. Tony comes from, tech royalty, basically. Jayce is a student, he's at the beginning of his career. Tony is already a millionaire, playboy, super scientist. And that leads into the next difference, that Jayce is this timid, straight-laced nerd, and Tony is a playboy. He's also a nerd, but he's also a playboy. And his life is, just not put together. It's a mess without his, without Pepper. Both these characters have partners who keep their heads down and work diligently to support our heroes, but in completely different ways. So Jayce's partner is there to give him confidence, to give practical direction to his ambition, and Tony's partner is there for the human element. Tony, is someone who feels isolated because of who he is. And, interestingly, this is probably the function that Jayce provides to Victor as Victor's partner. We do know that loneliness is a central element of Victor's character. Okay, and by the way, going back to confidence, so that's another difference here. Jayce isn't that confident. He's not meek either, but, compared to Tony, Tony is Mr. Confidence. Jayce, in Arcane at least, is actually pretty humble. He just wants to help. He puts the world before him. He feels indebted to the science and magic because of his childhood experiences. And in that experience, he experienced the true powerlessness of, humanity, basically, because of magic. And that powerlessness, that humility, that's all he can see when it comes to developing the science. Tony is anything but humble, and from what I understand, he's actually more like League Jayce in that regard, which is kind of interesting. He's not blinded by humility and powerlessness, he's not altruistic at all, it's the opposite. Tony is self-absorbed, and he can't see anything else other than the self-absorbed understanding of what his life is about and what it's dedicated to. And that difference in type of blindness, that's also reflected in the degree of how blind they are, and this is probably the biggest difference between the two characters, on paper, that Jayce doesn't realize he's making anything dangerous at all, and then Tony is is a weapons dealer. It's much more obvious with Tony, both in story to the characters that that are around him, that are in the story, and also to us watching. With Jayce, notice the terminology the wrists are couched in for most of the series. It's a safety concern. Heimerdinger knows that he's talking about weapons and that kind of danger, but I think Jayce and Victor are honestly thinking that he's talking about like workplace hazards and that kind of lack of safety. The possibility of weaponry isn't even mentioned until surprisingly late in this arc. It's just not on Jayce's radar. And then, meanwhile, we have Tony literally going to a war zone and doing like obviously dangerous weapons demonstrations. And I do like the difference this leads to. Jayce intentionally invents tech that will save the world and unintentionally dooms it. Tony unintentionally invents tech that will doom the world and intentionally has to save it. That's one thing I find so cool about these differences. It's not just that, here are places where the stories just kind of like misalign. No, they're diverting to opposite ends of the same narrative. And that's where this big plot difference comes in, because these two stories don't just end differently, they end in opposite ways. So we have two characters here on the same path. They come to terms with the horrors of war, and what do? Take matters into their own hands, and it doesn't work. But for Tony, he takes this as a sign he didn't try hard enough. Now he has to give it his all. He has to really be a hero this time. For Jayce, he takes his failure as a failure of approach. War doesn't work, it's a bad option. Jayce makes a 180, he tries to make peace. And it's interesting, even at this point, you could easily switch these two endings. You could have the opposite outcomes for each story. Tony could try again, recommit to solving his problems through weapons and through violence. And because he didn't try peace, then the whole thing blows up in his face, and his tech is taken over by Stane, the world is doomed, tragedy. Jayce could offer peace and it works, and we end in triumph. Just based on the morals alone, this is actually what I would have expected if you asked me which story ends in tragedy. Give peace a chance is totally the option which kind of should succeed morally. Keep fighting is the option that should fail and be punished. At least kind of going by popular morality. But no, Jayce gives peace a chance and he fails. Tony goes to war and he wins. So what accounts for these differences? What is this whole thing about? So I think it's time to see the bigger picture here. The big question, what is the MCU about? What is the major theme of the MCU? And before I answer this myself, I just want to say I would love to hear anyone's thoughts on this topic, on the major themes of Marvel. Definitely leave a comment if you have any theories about this. I'm a Marvel fan, but not a super fan, so I could definitely use some more informed opinions on this topic. Okay, but I do think that it's a good bet that this is the theme.
With great ability comes great accountability.
Okay, sorry, wrong clip.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Marvel is about unasked for empowerment and the responsibilities that come with it. It's not about science per se, that empowerment can come from science, but it doesn't have to be from a scientist. It can be from the military, it can be, by accident, it can be from pure nature, it can also, it can come from being a divinity, it can come from magic, it can be from outer space, it can come from training and hard work, presumably. I don't really get these characters. Arcane, I think, has two major themes. One is about accepting change, and that's not what this video is about, but the other is about science specifically. Arcane has a lot to say about science and how it affects society. I mentioned this in my short on Friday, but science really affects every level of society in Arcane, and it's so cool how they explore it from every different angle. It's honestly one of the most well-integrated themes into setting that I think I've ever seen. They explore so many different roles in science, the mentor, the patron, the prodigy, the criminal, the self-taught genius, the kind of come-from-nothing academic. They explore different topics that are integrated with science: politics, economics, war, crime, psychology, community, ethics. They show all these different ways that science impacts culture, but this is what it boils down to. The major MCU films are about empowerment and doing good. They're about the situation and the solution. Arcane is about the question: how does science impact the fate of society? And there's evidence of this distinction in some of the details of both stories. Jayce has a weapon. Tony is a weapon. Jayce sees the technology as external to him. It's a question that he can choose the answer to. Pick up the hammer, put down the hammer. Iron Man is about empowerment. The heroes of Marvel all kind of embody their abilities. They are the power. Even the characters who do have some kind of iconic weapon, it's something about them that using the weapon depends on. Even, by the way, the character who has an iconic weapon is a hammer. He's the one who can lift it. It's him. It's something internal. When Stane takes the tech for himself, we're shown definitively that Tony understands it better, he embodies it better. Stane isn't Iron Man because he doesn't have the mind of Iron Man. He's a fake. And now, once you have the power, how is that power used? That's where we have the question, the options. That's the journey the MCU stories take us on. The way tech is integrated into Arcane's story, we see a different structure here. The tech is external. We choose whether to pick it up or not. There are tons of scenes about whether to pick up the tech or to let it be, whether to use it or not, whether to put it down or not, whether to destroy it or not. There are moments like this in the MCU of whether to kind of hang up the suit, that kind of thing, but those questions are questions of identity, because the power is the identity. Do I be Spider-Man or whoever, or do I let that identity go? But Jayce is still Jayce without the hammer, at least in Arcane. Jayce, who is figuring out her identity, she's a perfect example of this. The question isn't whether or not to pick up fish bones, it's whether to sit in the Jayce chair or the powder chair. They purposely separate it for us like this so that we know that this is the moment she becomes Jayce. And then, after that, this is the result, the next step. And the proof is that we're not even thinking about violence and destruction when she sits down. We're thinking about her inner world. We're thinking about her relationship with Vi. And then when she does this, we're like, holy sprockets.
Holy sprockets.
I can't believe that line. It's that precise kind of perfectly inevitable surprise. It's so good. Anyway, this is the difference in theme. That creates all the differences in personality and plot we talked about earlier. In Arcane, we have someone who is advanced morally, but a beginner scientifically, and he has to learn how science fits into his morals. In Iron Man, we have someone who is advanced scientifically, but a beginner morally, and he has to learn how those morals can fit with his science. Jayce's morals give him confidence, but blind him to the science. Tony's science gives him confidence, but blinds him to the morality. Their partners fit into this mold. Jayce's partner is someone who primarily helps him with the science, but also helps him overcome this blindness. Tony's partner is someone who helps him with the morality and helps him overcome that blindness. And the tragic ending, it's about making us ask this central question, how does science impact the fate of society? The answer our world seems to live by is good. Science is good, right? So we can't end on that. So by ending on bad, it creates doubt. It forces us to confront the question. And by the way, notice that it's a slightly different question from how do we as scientists impact the fate of society. Jayce makes a decision and it doesn't end up mattering at all. It's not scientists, it's science. How does science impact the fate of society? Because beyond a certain point, it effectively kind of takes on a life of its own. And Arcane is dealing with that, how we feel about that as a society. Marvel, on the other hand, is trying to inspire us. It wants to encourage us to use our own modest amounts of power in our lives to fulfill our own heroic responsibilities. So it has to end on triumph. It can't end on doubt. It can't end on the question, does it work? Can we do it? It has to end on the answer, yes, Iron Man can do it, and so can you. So, to recap, these stories follow the same general outline. Tech is invented by naive scientists, tech falls into the wrong hands, scientists must come to terms with the horrors of war, and then take matters into his own hands to prevent war, either successfully or unsuccessfully. Both stories deal with the same question in a broad sense, the question of morality of technological process. Arcane is asking, what is the moral nature of this phenomenon? And has to show us failure in order to make us take that question seriously. Iron Man is asking, what is our moral responsibility to this phenomenon, and has to show us victory for us to be inspired to follow its example. It's this subtle difference which gives the stories their uniqueness and character and how each story plays out, while still both existing in that same overarching structure. Obviously, I love Arcane, but I love Iron Man 1 as well. It's definitely one of my favorite Marvel movies. Both stories are so successful at dealing with these themes. And by the way, just to be clear, I'm not saying either story stole from one another or that it's a problem that there's overlaps like this. I think it's so beautiful. Just like in my other video about Jayce, about, is she a hero, is she a villain? Being able to tell different stories with the same set of events is mind-blowing to me. It's so cool. And it tells us so much about just how intricate and kind of the art of storytelling can be. We always have great discussions in the comments, so subscribe and we'd love to have you down there. It's ongoing discussion. It's all the same names each week. So hit the like button and support me on Patreon. Big thanks to the patrons. I got a new mic this week because of you, so I truly appreciate the support. Minor Champion is a comic I make with Chiara Iacobelli about a superhero who's unreasonably dedicated to solving really small problems. It's a lot of fun and it's free, so check it out if you're into webcomics and webtoons. Link in the description. New video every Sunday, every Wednesday too, for the time being at least. I'm trying out different schedules, so I might eventually change it up. But for now, every Sunday, long video, every Wednesday, shorter video, maybe a video on Friday too. But just generally, videos in the future. That's kind of the important thing. Anyway, thanks for watching.